So, what tips do you have for hosts to prepare to really bring out the best of their guests?
Okay, great question. Your job is to make rapport with the person in front of you. Your job is not to judge them. The audience's job is to judge them. So what I do is when I'm working live audience, I work out the Wi-Fi code of the audience, working out the demographic of who they are, what they want, where they're from, what their objectives are, and what will make them happy, and what will make them sad. People don't have to necessarily be happy. They can be satisfied with a sob story. It doesn't matter. You take it on a range of emotions. But with the person in front of you, your job is to find instant rapport, to get it so they know that you are competent, that you know your stuff, and also that you're going to get the best out of them. Now, the way I do it, when I'm hosting a big event, for instance, if I've got a panel that's suddenly thrown on me, as they often do, I've got four strangers, or three strangers usually, three strangers and me. I don't know who they are. If I ask them in advance or ask the organizer, can you send me their details? Everyone sends me a Wikipedia page. I've got better things to do than see you went to Harvard and you opened a business when you're 3 years old and you won the most positive. I don't care. I want three things from you. I want to know your name, designation, one thing that you did that gives you bragging rights to say that you're worth listening to, and secondly, what it is that you're going to be talking about. What's your area of expertise? So when I talk to interview somebody, what I do is I ask them what they want to talk about. I know the key area of the subject that we're going to do, but I ask them, what area do you feel most comfortable about? And with that, they either want to promote something, or if we have no subject, if we're given a subject because the event is about human resources or the metaverse or about the food industry or hospitality, I know it's related to that. I know what their position would be in it because I'm a BBC journalist by trade. And from there, work out what they want to talk about and where they want to lead this conversation for the audience. I can only remember a handful of interviews that have been terrible when people don't want to give you an answer, so it's a one-word answer. And one guy who, whenever he said anything, I would repeat back to him what he said, and then he'd say, "No, it's not that." I'm thinking, but you just said it. But he was just an argumentative guy. I met him later on, lovely guy, but that's how his brain works. He just likes to throw stuff out and change it. I'm an amazing chef. He creates the most incredible dishes, but as an interviewee, I would never, ever, ever sit with this guy ever again. I buy him a beer, but that's your lot.
So, on the flip side, then, what tips do you have for guests to get the most out of their interviews?
Okay, great question again. Why are you going on this interview? What do you get out of it? Who's your audience? What can you do to convert that audience to go onto your mailing list or sell product or start following you on social? If you don't know any of that, why are you going on in the first place? Because time is the one thing you never get back again. So use it preciously. So what you should do is know what it is you're going to be talking about, who it is who's going to be talking to you, and also have a call to action. For me, for instance, I create industry icons. I create people of industry success stories and help them to grow their brand. I teach them to speak. And I've got a community around the world called the Game Changers. So when I'm being interviewed, say I'm talking on stage as a keynote, or if I was being interviewed using my own set, I would have a QR code. So people could scan it, get an instant download of a free gift, and from there, they go onto my mailing list so I can keep the interaction going. Because when you're being interviewed, if it's 10 minutes, if it's 15 minutes, if it's a personal interview about you, your brand, and your business, you've got people warmed up and excited. Now, if they can't then go to you, like for instance, my website is speakonstage.com. If they go to speakonstage.com, then they can follow up with me and see how I can help them, following my social media or anything else. If I don't have something to sell, or I don't have where to send people, they're going to be all fired up, all excited, and we're going to use that energy on the next person that comes up. So why would you waste that? So I would suggest that the thing to do is ask the person what they want to talk to you about, and then have it pre-prepared. I'd also say get some stories. Stories sell really well. It's not about you. Nobody cares about you. You don't care about me. Nobody has to care about me. It's what can Dave give you is important. I could be anybody. It doesn't matter. Most of the people listening to this or watching this will have no idea who I am at all. But if they Google Dave Crane, they'll find it. And I'll just move my head to one side so you get the spelling right. So you need to know how to tell those stories, rehearse them in your head. have an idea about, if you can, I mean, what I normally do is I'll ask in advance what the questions are. And I'll get my wife to do it on my behalf because we work together as a team. She's the bad cop, I'm the good cop. So she'll say, what is it you're going to talk to Dave about? So that means I can pre-prepare the answers. Now, I don't pre-prepare parrot fashion. In fact, I generally don't write anything down because I want it to feel spontaneous. But what I do is have it in my mind that these are the areas that I can enhance for the interviewee and for the interviewer, and also for the audience. I want to make sure that it's a rewarding experience for them and not just all about me. Look at me, I'm great, and so on. Nobody cares about that, and I'm far too old to care whether they care about me being gorgeous anyway. So I'm more than happy for that not to be the case.
So when you're preparing to do an interview, do you write down your questions?
Me? No. But only because I've been around a long time. When I'm doing a keynote on stage, I tend to do, when you get these guys called free runners, the guys who basically jump over walls and over lampposts and do all this free running stuff. And I know superheroes like Spider-Man would use that, but there's people in real life who do that. I like to do that when I'm speaking. I like to go out there with an audience, have a basic subject worked out for who they are in front of me, and take them on a journey. And I realize that the way I do it with stories is like when I used to be a DJ. When you're a DJ, you go out and you look at your audience and you play your first track to get the audience excited, and you'll fill the dance floor with something that's a crowd pleaser. And while that's playing, you're thinking, right, what goes with that progresses the atmosphere and takes us in a new direction, or continues the direction if I want to. And then you put on a track there, and then you put on another track, and you do this all night until you take people on a journey of experiences. As a DJ, you do that with music. I realize as a speaker, that's what I do as well. I DJ stories and I DJ ideas. And when you do it like that, when you create a real relationship with the audience, the way to do it is not to, what I'd say to anybody who's a speaker or an interviewer is don't present anymore, don't speak anymore, have a conversation. Because if you have a conversation with your audience, or you have a conversation with whoever's interviewing you, then you don't have to be precise because they'll forgive you. But if you say, this is me, I know what I'm talking about, blah, 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 I'm the authority, then people want you to get it wrong. If you don't say that and you say, look, ask me anything, if I get it wrong, then it's fair enough, but off the top of my head, this is what I believe it is, then people go, oh, okay. And the idea is that you should be imagining yourself sitting with the audience next to them, staring at the stage or staring at the interview as one of them. And the other thing I'd say, especially when you're on a medium like this, is TV and radio, and this is TV ultimately, podcasts, radio, is a one-to-one experience. It's not one-to-many, like a live audience. So I can't say, how are you guys out there? Same as you wouldn't say on the radio, how are you guys doing? Because if I'm driving my car, I'm thinking, what guys are you talking to? This isn't personal. You're not talking to me. You're talking to everybody, and it doesn't feel like I've got a personal relationship. I'll find somebody who does appreciate me. And so it's really about imagining who your avatar is. Who would be the person you want to connect to? Who's the audience going to be? And it's usually the audience that follow the interviewer. What does that person want? So, for instance, if it's Joe's a businessman who started his own business a couple of years ago, self-made success story, but finding it hard during a recession. I've got to talk to Joe. I've got to give Joe all the tips, all the ideas that Joe would be able to use and then do something with. If I'm talking to me about me with an audience watching, who cares? So I think valuing people's time is a massive part of all this.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make when hosting an interview?
Yeah, I think the host has got to create a relationship with the guest. There's got to be a rapport there. They've got to represent the audience that's watching. They've got to fill in the gaps of what the audience would want to ask. So if the person in front of you is saying something that's clearly BS, you've got to pull them up on it. And if you can explain it and they stick with that story, that's it. But the audience is going to want to have that. There's nothing worse than watching and not being able to interact. You want to feel that the interviewer is representing you when you're doing it. So amongst the mistakes is not getting to know your audience and thinking it's anybody. It's not. There's a certain type of person who enjoys your stuff, and it might not even be you. You need to do your research. Have a look at social media. Do the data, find out who pays attention to it. If you're doing a live broadcast on Facebook or LinkedIn, have a look at who's turning up. Look at the broadcast later and work out whether it was male or female or any particular industry or so on. Once you've got an idea about your avatar, and there might be several avatars, then you know where to send your business and how to do that. But it's very important you appreciate the people you got in front of you. So, for instance, if we were talking to kids, if we had a young audience, say even teenagers, I wouldn't be talking like this. I'd be talking with relevant points for them, for stuff that they're going to want to put into practice. So it's important to know who your audience is. I think that you need to give them what they need it's ultimately what's in it for them. So give them what they need. And if you can, when it's a live session, we've got all the facilities to let people ask questions, not let them live on the show, but give feedback in the chat comments or whatever it is. So be aware of that. And also have fun. Whenever there's so much content out there and so much choice, if they don't have fun with you, they go click and they leave, probably within the first 3 to 4 seconds. If they think this is dull, they'll go. And the younger your audience gets, the less patience they have. Got to remember, TikTok being one of the most popular platforms for social media on the planet, nothing goes to 60 seconds. My daughter, who's 11, shows me stuff all the time that's 15 to 30 seconds maximum. And she's laughing her head off, and my head's exploding because I hate it. I hate watching it because it's just too fast. But I'm not the target market. I look at what people are doing in business, and they've somehow managed to work out this is how you do it on TikTok. You give them a very quick tip. You tell them what the tip's going to be. You give them a tip, and you say, follow me, and that's it. Do that in 30 seconds, and people go, this is great, and they share it, and we give you eyeballs, and then it starts to grow your channel. So always keeping an eye on the data, always keeping an eye on the audience, and always being as transparent as you can be is important. But if you are scared of being you, and you are nervous, then you can create a different version of yourself. That's the person that goes on. So, I mean, for people who've got a fear of public speaking, or you've got imposter syndrome, I've got a system that I worked out to be able to get people over imposter syndrome. Would you like me to share it with you, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's quite a long one, but it's worth it. So there's 3 versions of you. First version is what's on your birth certificate, which says who you were when you were born. Mine says David Maxwell Crane, born years ago. And so you go to school with that name. It's shortened by your parents, and you grow into somebody who later on becomes a version 2 of you, and that's a social media name that you use. So mine's Dave Crane. David Maxwell Crane became Dave Crane. And so Dave Crane's on the social media. He's a nice guy. He's been on lots of stages, and he's got a wife. He's got a kid. He's got 2 dogs. He's all right. You know, it's fine. But what I realized was after the pandemic, when work was coming back to me, because I'd been as an entertainer without work for about 18 months, apart from doing stuff online, but it's not quite the same thing because you don't get the same interaction, and often you don't get paid for it. I had to jump back into the gig market quickly, and I wasn't ready. I was still on burnout because during that pandemic, I did about 200 live shows on social media to let people know that I was here and available. And it paid off later on. But I realized that me as Dave Crane, I was burnt out. I was tired. I was worried. I was insecure. I had a family to look after. We got through it, but it wasn't easy. So I thought, is there an extra version of me that I could get? I thought, yeah, if you think about it, when you're in your zone, and sports people will know this, when you hit the golf ball, or when you score a goal, or you get a basket, or you get a home run, it's not you that does it. It's a certain version of you that steps up. If you think about it too much, you hijack it, but there's a certain version of you that steps in like a muscle memory that does this stuff. And so I realized that my very best version of me is when I've got a live microphone with a live audience, and I make snap decisions, and I get things done, and I look after the sponsors, and I look after the audience, and I just think super fast on bam, bam, bam. And I thought, well, why don't you give them a name? So I decided to call this version of me Max, which is an incremented version of Dave Crane. So the third version of me is Max, taken from my middle name, Maxwell. So to test the water with Max, I decided, let's see how good he is. What if he's in a real setting? So if I can make great decisions when I've got a microphone and a live audience, and that's how I've made my success so far, what about in normal situations? Why don't I ask Max what he would do? So I had a situation where I was chasing clients and some people weren't getting back to me. I thought, well, what would Max say? So I said, all right, Max, what would you do? And my subconscious mind said to me, well, why don't you give him 24 hours and tell him that if you don't get back in 24 hours, then I'll be too busy working with somebody else. I'm thinking, you can't do that. You'll lose a client. But I thought, if I'm going to wake up Max and trust Max, I'm going to do it. So I did it. And some people stepped up and came back to me fast. Some people ummed and ahed, and I realized they were never going to work with me anyway. So when I told them, right, that's it, we've missed the opportunity and I'm busy working on something else, they never said, oh dear, that's terrible. They just didn't say anything. So it was quite clear that they didn't care. So then I thought, if Max is making these great decisions, what about if I trust Max to make all those decisions? So I handed over the running of my business, the running of my decisions and everything apart from my family members to Max. So Max now makes those decisions for me and is fearless. So the example of how that would work is during the time when we came out of the pandemic, I was invited to host the 2020 World Cricket, ICC World Cricket Cup. Now, I don't know anything about cricket. I'm not even a big fan of cricket. But where I'm based in Dubai, and for a huge Asian audience, Indians, Pakistanis, and Brits, and Australians, and New Zealanders, everybody's cricket crazy. Now, I had to host the event, which means I've got to be on a microphone in front of a live audience with it being watched by 200 million people around the world. And I've got to get the call right. I've got to say it's a 6, it's a 4. I've got to announce the new cricketer that's coming up. I've got to say he was caught and he's out and all this kind of stuff. So I was being coached to do it live by some guys who'd just done it before. And I knew it was going to be difficult, and I knew I'd get it wrong, but I knew that by the end of it, I could boast about the fact, well, not boast, but I could lay claim to the fact that I can host world cricket at the very highest level. So I did 8 matches, and we went right to the finals, and I was able to turn around and have that. Now, it wasn't me that did it, it was Max. For me, life was a bit more challenging, especially as I lost my dad after the second match. I lost my dad to COVID, and I still had another 7 matches to look after over the next 2 weeks. And the only way I could get through that is by handing over the microphone to Max. Take care of that. I'll go and I'll be spending my own time quiet. So I stepped up, did the gig. Nobody knew, nobody needed to know. But when I had my quiet time, I'd come off the pitch, go back home, call my mom, check my family, and make sure everything was going. So that third version of you, that superhero version of you, is immensely powerful. It's got an ego as well, so you've got to keep that in check. But as long as you care about people and you want them to be better off than they were before you first met them, that version of you can be very powerful, very effective, and produce the best content and presentation skills that you could ever want.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying, because you do kind of have to separate your personas, depending on what role you're playing and what job you're doing, right? It's a lot different. Well, and even with interviews, to me, it's a whole different skill set between interviewing someone and being interviewed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, typically what happens is when I'm interviewing somebody, this is mine. You're in my house now, and we're going to set the scene, and it's going to run the way I'm going to run it. And I don't tend to do one-to-one interviews too often. I tend to do more panels. So I've got a group. It's like juggling. It's like herding cats. So you've got all these egos all trying to get stuff done. Now, if I'm hosting it, I'll take everyone to one side first. I'll say, this is how we're going to do it, whether it's online or on stage. This is how we're going to do it. I'm going to give you a question. I'm going to work my way through everybody. In fact, what I do is I say, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the audience. Keep it short and sweet. You got 60 seconds maximum to say who you are and why the audience should be interested in you. I'll give you a chance to do that. Then I've got all these questions which you've already agreed with me. I'll ask the first person, and then we'll move it all the way along. You've got 60 to 90 seconds to answer the question. If you take it longer than that, then I will not ask you the next question. You'll forfeit it because you overstayed your welcome. And that's the way I run it. And so everybody knows what their role is, and I'll give everyone a fair chance to play, and I'll make it perfect. Now, if I'm a panel member on somebody else's panel, I'll do the opposite. For me, it's a beauty pageant. I will cheat. I will take up as much time as I want, and I'll say what I want to say, and I'll make sure that people come away from there saying, I want to work with Dave Crane. That was funny, that's insightful, and I really want to hire you, and I want to get you into work with my staff. Completely different ends of it. But then again, you see, if I sit there quietly, and here's an example. I was hosting, in fact, I was a keynote speaker at an event for women in Dubai. So business women in Dubai, all really high-end, brilliant, fantastic, wonderful businesses. And I was the only guy in the room, apart from two boyfriends that had come along to support the audience. So I delivered a keynote all about branding. It went down very well. And then I was put on a panel. It was me and there's three other ladies. Now, the other ladies were one of the top business coaches in the country, a royal, and an author who just brought out a book on women in business, and me looking like blooming Morgan Freeman. So I'm sitting there, and so because I was sitting on the first chair, the question came to me. So I answered the question, then it goes to the next person who answered better, next person who answered better than that, and the third person after me was like they were being interviewed by Larry King. So then the next question came to me again. I went, stop. I said, what? I said, don't ask me the first question. I said, why? I said, because they're smarter than I am. They've got better answers than me. Can you start at that end? So at least I've got a fighting chance to come up with something interesting by the time it came to me. Now the audience laughed and the interviewer laughed and the panel laughed. And so they started all the questions at the other end. But strategically, I'd hijacked that panel. I'd rewired it and reframed it the way I wanted it to be. So I would have more time to think about the answers. So when they come to me, I've got the option, give something new and insightful, agree with anybody who's been before me, or throw it to the audience. And ask what the audience, I've got a load of different tools and tricks to play with because I can get the final laugh. And if you look at the best scene stealers, that's like a Bill Murray. Bill Murray on camera is famous for walking in and not caring. He's like in Ghostbusters. You couldn't take your eyes off him because he was the one who would say something that would make everybody laugh their heads off and still stay within the character, but do it right. So I rewired and reframed my relationship with the panel and with the interviewer and with the audience because I wanted it to be Dave shaped. Now I would never do that. If I was running the gig, I'd make sure that it was all run the way that I wanted to. Now you've got to be very careful to not do it in an arrogant way. You've got to do it and in fact, one of the tips I would give is don't try and be funny. Be warm. Warm works just as well as funny, but it means the pressure is off you. If you're warm, like Oprah Winfrey is not funny. If she does crack a joke, it becomes the best joke ever because it feels different to what you're listening to normally. But when you go to an Oprah Winfrey show, you know that you're going to feel welcome in that show. Even if you don't like the guest or the subject, you're in a safe space. So as a host, as you do very, very well, Jeff, you make the guest feel welcome, you make the audience feel it's a warm environment to be in. And so if you want to be funny, you can be, but you don't have to be. If you're a comedian, you've got to better your jokes all the time or you're not as good as the other comedian. And that's a really hard act to follow. So don't do it.
Yeah, that's good advice. What was the Dollar Shave Club? Do you remember those guys? Do you remember they hit the big time with one video, right? And it's a marvelous video. But so they asked the guy, the founder of the company, who kind of had a comedic background or a theater background. I can't remember, but so they asked him. They said, "Well, should we try to be funny in our videos?" And he says, "Well, are you funny? If you're funny, then do it. If you're not, then don't try." Right? So. Anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, I've done comedy. I'm a stage hypnotist, so I've built comedy into that. But what I am is I'm a funny guy, but I'm not a joke teller. So I find that there's a kind of persona that I can have as a host of an event where you can be funny, you can be with the audience, get the audience's Wi-Fi code. I can play it straight if it's a business event, or I can add some humor when it needs to be. But I watch a lot of people who are kind of outside of their depth, and it's cringy. You know, it's really hard to be a stand-up comedian. It's really difficult. By the time you get to the level of some of the guys you see on TV, they've died more times than anybody else. But that's why they've got such good acts, and that's why they're such top of the range professionals. Watch a guy like, take any comedian that you'd see making movies, like Kevin Hart or anybody like that. They can go on any stage and they kill it. They're brilliant at it. Any observation they make is brilliant. Why? Because they're so good at understanding how to work audiences. I think it's difficult to jump into that arena if you haven't had that experience, and you don't really want to get that experience live and burn an interview or an interview guest, because you'll get a reputation for not being very good and people won't come back again. Play it straight, find your personality, and my own saying is jump and grow wings on the way down.